YouTube, Awesome Writer here. Welcome to my video discussing which is the better anniversary season for Sentai, Gokaiger or Zenkaiger? Gokaiger. The answer is Gokaiger. Dawson's Rentals. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and get started. So with Zenkaiger being done now, I thought this would be an interesting time to discuss, the pros and cons of both series and which one did a better job at being an anniversary season. And honestly, a lot of questions like this are kind of subjective. There's probably somebody out there that thinks Zenkaiger was better or they liked it better in the approach. So this is basically just my opinion and my kind of discussion about what I think is interesting about the different approaches and why I personally think Gokaiger was more successful at being an anniversary season. Let's talk about a few comparisons and then I'll kind of get down to the main thing that I think separates Gokaiger from Zenkaiger. So both series took inspiration design-wise from their predecessors. Zenkaiger's was much more in your face about it. Gokaiger's themselves, in terms of the very core base of the designs, was all them. Meaning that the Gokaiger suits, if you were to just take the Gokaiger suits and their original changer and their weapons and put them on an island, no one would ever know. They're on an island because they're pirates, get it? On an island, no one would ever know they were an anniversary season because it's they're their own team. I think that physically represents what works about Gokaiger for me, is that yes, they are an anniversary season, but they're also their own team, and I think the suits represent that. Of course, later we get auxiliary Zords and, Silver Zord based off of other designs, and of course the Gokai changes, which this was, the first time Sentai did that. This was a new idea before Decade and before this series, and now it's kind of commonplace idea or an idea that people want, but this was another way of celebrating the aesthetic. I think the designs, for the most part, were more subtle than Zenkaiger's, outside of Gao Lion literally being Gao Lion, Magi Rangers was a little clunky, but what I'm talking about is ones like the Q-Rex or Go Ryujin, I think it was called. I'm calling it Q-Rex so long now because of Power Rangers, but that's such a perfect example of Gokaiger's designs being a little more balanced in regards to the anniversary stuff, because it's clearly inspired by past designs, but it's also very much its own thing in comparison to the Kaiju mech from Zenkaiger. I love that mech actually. It's my favorite of the series, but it's obvious. It's so obvious. And that comes down to the Zenkaiger suits as well. As I mentioned, the Gokaiger suits stand out on their own. The Zenkaiger's designs are all very clearly based off of past designs. They don't kind of have their own identity in that regard, outside of being unique, but you know what I mean. Even Two Kaiser, as much as I love the suit, if you take away the number, he almost looks like he could have been a 7th Gokaiger designed for a Returns movie. And then of course, the Zenkaigers use their version of changes is using the gears, which just gives them random powers and stuff like that. And it's different than the Gokai changes. I think the Gokai changes was cooler at the time. It's certainly not something I'm excited to see in Dawn Brothers or see them overused, but it's cool within the context of Gokaiger because it worked well for the tributes. I think the coolest thing for me was seeing stuff like the gender swaps and seeing the different suits and stuff like that. Another category, of course, is cameos and references. Now, both series have a lot of different cameos and not cameos. Both series don't have cameos. Both series have a lot of Easter eggs and references to the past Sentai series. Honestly, I can't remember every single one from Gokaiger. I know Zenkaiger had a lot of them, but I think a lot of Zenkaiger's stuff was much more in the forefront, and the Zenkaiger stuff was kind of in the background. Most of the celebration in regards to references just happened because Navi would tell them, oh, this was this Sentai, and this is what they did, and this is their power. But there wasn't a whole lot of acknowledgement outside of that. But both of them had a lot of Easter eggs and references with that type of stuff. But as far as cameos go, Zenkaiger had no cameos outside of the Zenkai Red special. Now, it's possible there was some deep cut cameos that I don't know about, like a writer or a director or something. I don't know. I never heard anything like that, but I wouldn't know if they did that. But there was no main characters that were coming from other Sentai series that were in the core 49 episode run. There was some cameos, like I said, in the Zenkai Red special. There was some in the Red special movie. There probably will be in some future movies the Zenkaigers are in, but in regards to the main series proper, there really wasn't any cameos. Meanwhile, Gokaiger was littered with cameos. And that might be a reason lots of people will say Gokaiger's a superior anniversary, because they got the cameos. Not only did they get cameos, but it's well known that Gokaiger was so well received that some actors contacted Toei about coming back. So they ended up having more cameos than they even knew what to do with. The thing about the cameos, though, is I think absolutely that added to it being a more special anniversary season. And the thing that was great about the Gokaiger cameos for me is something I'm going to go into about my main point of this video, is that it wasn't just about them getting the cameos and hey, look, they showed up, they stood there, they fought over an idiotic misunderstanding. Most of the cameos were meaningful, whether it was meaningful to that character, to the series they came from, or it was meaningful to the journey of one or more of the Gokaigers, or possibly some combination of all those things. Most of the cameos were well done, and of all all the anniversary seasons I've seen, not just Sentai, but Rider too, they had the best cameos. Like, again, it wasn't just that they got them, is that they had substance to them. However, it's not just the cameos that I think was a better thing for the anniversary. I think it was the celebration of Sentai's legacy. I talked about this a little bit in my series review for Zenkaiger, but what I think made Gokaiger so good for me is, like, yes, all of that stuff, like the Gokai changes and the cameos, was just really, like, a lot of delicious icing on the cake that just really solidified it as a great anniversary series. But when you got down to it, of course, I always talk about this, but they focused on the Gokaigers themselves. The Gokaigers themselves had their own story. The Zenkaigers did too. They very much functioned as their own story. I think you could remove the anniversary aesthetics and it could be its own story. But Gokaiger took extra time with its characters, and I think the long-running character arc for them was them going from this ragtag group of pirates that only cared about themselves to embracing the legacy of Sentai and stepping up to become the 35th Super Sentai. And that was obviously enhanced by their journey and meeting and learning about the different Sentai. But that was, in my opinion, the best way that Gokaiger celebrated the 35th anniversary, is that I feel they were celebrating the legacy of Sentai via that storyline of them truly learning to become the 35th Sentai. Because within the context of the show, it felt like a celebration of the legacy Sentai had had in that world. And then I think it also celebrated the context in the meta franchise as well. I don't think that Zenkaiger had that. I think most of its celebration was very superficial. Like, hey, look, the suits are designed off of this. Like, this reference is here from the gear. You know, we have the Stacy summoning the mecha with the toy boxes. There was some cool references. Like, I really liked the deeper cut references, like the reference to Jetman's ending. I really appreciated those deep cuts that were more meaningful because you had to actually have watched the show or at least know it, rather than just a superficial reference. They did have those. But there was very little meat and substance to it. It was a very superficial celebration, and I didn't feel the celebration of the legacy. And this is something else I talked about in my series review, as I think they really missed on the boat to take a page from Gokaiger's book. Not copy them, but to take a page from the idea of celebrating the anniversary by having a legacy celebration. And the thing about the Zenkaigers is, what's different about them? The Gokaigers were different because, I mean, Gokaigers look much more traditionally like Rangers, but what was different about them is they were a team of pirates. They didn't start off as heroes as a team, and they didn't start off as a Sentai, and they learned to become that. The Zenkaigers thing is they do start off as a Sentai. Their thing is they look very different. They're a non-traditional team. They don't have a Red Ranger leader. They have 4 Robo Rangers. They addressed that in the Zenkai Red special for a little mini arc about them being different, but they're still a Sentai. I mentioned this in the series review. This would have been an excellent, in my opinion, series-running arc to celebrate the legacy of Sentai by have an arc about the Zenkaigers proving that they are worthy of being the 45th Super Sentai despite being different, and maybe they're not so different after all because, you know, they're still a Sentai at heart. And that could have been such a cool way to thematically celebrate the legacy of the Sentai series, both within the contents of the show, or context of the show, and in the meta series context. I think that could have been such a cool way, without copying Gokaiger, but taking a similar page from it. And for me, that's a much more meaningful celebration. Like, what Gokaiger did in terms of making me feel like they were celebrating the legacy of Sentai and what it meant is much more meaningful than cameos and changes and all that stuff. And I think Zenkaiger really missed out on that. It felt like it lacked a lot of substance and heart in regards to being an anniversary series. Funny for me personally, because when Zenkaiger was first announced, I didn't want it to be like Gokaiger and be overstuffed with cameos and changes or anything, because, I mean, I'm a little sick to death of that after Anniversary drowning. But also, I wanted it to differentiate itself. So on paper, Zenkaiger did exactly what I wanted to. It wasn't trying to be Gokaiger, and it didn't have too much stuff. But I'll be honest, even for a person like me, who's sick of the anniversary and team-ups, I was expecting a little bit something more meaningful. And I think Zenkaiger had the potential there, and I think the Zenkai Red storyline in the Red special is the blueprint for that. But I want to know what you guys think. Which one do you prefer? What do you think Zenkaiger was successful at as an anniversary series? What do you think Gokaiger was more successful at? Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell. Notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.